Well, hello, friends. Teresa Poor here, and I have a pretty interesting and exciting and I hope helpful topic that I want to share with you today. And it's titled How Fighting Saved My Marriage. I think a lot of times as we see people's lives on social media and we kind of see the inside scoop, but it's really the outside scoop of what's going on in people's world, we overestimate or perhaps underestimate the things that people deal with below the surface. And in today's busy, busy world, we as friends and as spouses pick up so much more throughout the day that, if we're not careful, we run into situations where things just pile up and pile up and pile up, and then finally come to a head. And that head, a lot of times, is found in a fight or a heated, elevated discussion, right? So I want to talk to you about that today because I think a lot of times we've grown up. I remember when I was a kid, I hated hearing my parents fight. I hated the sound of anybody, not agreeing. And I think I kind of picked up that feeling of being very diplomatic and trying to always be a problem solver, and I kind of shied away from conflict as a child because I hated the feeling of fighting. But what I have found, being married myself now, Royal and I are going on 23 years of marriage. Crazy, right? Uh, Sometimes fighting is necessary. It comes to a place where you come to a head where you're finally able to see eyeball to eyeball and get through situations that may be causing you friction. So, if you're watching this today or you're catching the replay, I want to encourage you through this. Again, I have grown up thinking that fighting was negative. So, I want to change your thought process around that a little bit and share with you a little insight on how it has really helped me to see things a little bit differently. So, let's talk about, lifestyle and all that and the things that we deal with right now. Royal and I have both a couple of different businesses that we run uniquely, individually, and together. We homeschool our child. We're active in all kinds of different things. And throughout the day, we find ourselves communicating all the time, but it's typically a communication to get from point A to point B, and not always that communication of, how you feeling and what's going on in your world, because we're constantly on the go. And while our life is kind of unique because we're involved in so many things, I feel like most relationships are in that place as well. Right? You're being pulled in many directions. Maybe it's social encounters, maybe it's children's sports and activities. It could be any kind of thing that's pulling your attention and keeping you from having those intentional discussions. And so when I talk about fighting today, I want to kind of reframe your thoughts from that negative approach to a intentional discussion. And so I'm going to share with you, very recently, Royal and I had a conversation, and it was literally about, forward thinking, things that we're going to do in the future with business. And it came to a heated discussion. And one of the words that stood out in that discussion was a word that I want you to write down and I want you to think about and meditate on. And that word is ex- expected, but really it's expectation. The word that he used was or the phrase that he used was I expected, but the root of it was an expectation was there that I wasn't meeting. And I, as humans and as individuals and people, we pick up expectations all the time in our life, right? We are designed, and as humans, we look for safety and security and routines and things of that nature. So our brain is constantly making expectations around relationships, around habits, around what's right, what's wrong, et cetera, et cetera. You could come up with as many expectations as you want, and the expectation itself is not a problem. The problem is when you don't take that expectation and communicate it to your partner, your friend, your spouse, your mentor, whoever it is that you've created this expectation with, and now you're holding to a standard, right? So when it came to this discussion that Royal and I were having, he used that word. I expected XYZ and we're not there. And so my immediate response was, it's interesting that you expected that because we never discussed it. And so, friends, I want to talk to you about that. Most of the fights, most of the disagreements that people have are going to be because of two things. Number one, lack of intentional communication. Number two, as expectations that cannot be met if communication does not exist. So, how you deal with it, really and truly, when you feel like an expectation is coming up, right? Maybe your expectation at work is that your employees show up at a certain time and they leave at a certain time and they go to lunch at a certain time. Have you had that communication with them, right? At home with your spouse. If your expectation is that so and so takes the trash out, have you had that conversation or did you just expect it, right? Maybe the expectation that you have is that when you feel a certain way, it's time to start a communication. But have you ever communicated that, right? I want to encourage you today that a lot of times, discussions and intentional communication, AKA fighting, comes to a point where you literally just have to stop and you have to say, okay, what's going on behind the surface here? What are my expectations? And did I communicate it? Because no matter how amazing my husband is, no matter how amazing I am, if we have expectations of each other and never communicate them to one another, we're never going to meet it. And we're always going to run into those situations where we feel underappreciated, undervalued, not seen, not heard by the person, perhaps, that's supposed to be all of those things for you to begin with. So do yourself a favor. Take on these 3 tips right here. Number 1, have communication, have a plan for what you want to communicate when a new expectation comes up, and just do it. You don't have to wait for those heated discussions to arise. The minute that you feel like you've got a new expectation or something isn't being met, take a moment and pause and have an intentional conversation with your spouse around it. Number 2, when you communicate, this is something that I feel is so important. And I teach a class on communication because communication to me is the one thing that can make your relationships phenomenal, or the one thing that can absolutely destroy relationships when you don't have communication. And if you would like some information on techniques and how to communicate, I'd be happy to share that. Or you can go to my website, teresapoore.com, and find that course. In fact, there's handouts and everything for you around communication because I really believe it is key. But when you communicate, one of the keys around it is that we listen to understand, not listen to respond. And I feel like that happens so many times in arguments and discussions, or even just conversations with your kids, family members, coworkers, whatever. We're always trying to think of how we can solve the problem, which may or may not even be a problem, right? As opposed to listening to see where that person is coming from. So, in addition to when you have an expectation, communicate it, I want you to peel that communication back a whole nother layer and communicate with the intent of listening to understand. And then finally, when you communicate your expectations and you communicate with the intent of understanding, the last thing I want you to do is give your partner, your child, whoever it is, a way out. And what I mean by that is there will be some expectations that we pick up because they're based on what we have been programmed to expect, to need, or that we feel like that person should fulfill. But there are some times that that person, no matter how amazing they are, they don't have the capacity to fulfill it. So when you have those communications with them, I want you to give them the opportunity to say, I can't do that. I can't be that, and be okay with it, right? And in return, obviously, it can't be every time. Like I can't tell my kid can't say to me, "Mom, I can't do that." every single time I ask her to pick up her socks or whatever, right? But there are going to be times where your expectations and the person's capacity or capability cannot meet. And to save a relationship, you have to be able to give them the same grace that you would want. And at the same time, communicate when you can't meet those expectations. And that's really what we call setting boundaries. So I want to recap all of this with you real quick, and to say, sometimes, fighting or intentional conversations have to come to a head, to a place where it's like, okay, we've gone around this merry-go-round. Enough is enough is enough. And we're going to get to the root of what the issue is, right? That's what I mean by fighting, coming to an intentional conversation. And then when we get there, communicate with the willingness and the desire to understand the other person's point of view, to discuss any known or unknown expectations, and finally, to give yourself and give them grace to bow out of a situation where an expectation may not be fair. Friends, thank you for watching today. I hope that this short video can save you some headache and heartache in your relationships with your spouse or whomever it is that you're maybe struggling with in communication. Communication, in my opinion, really is the key to successful relationships. Now you have the key. Go unlock the success you deserve. Thanks for watching. If you want more information or more help, please visit my website, teresapor.com, and let's stay connected. Have a great day. Bye.